Hi friends! During this shelter in place time, I've been thinking about what I could do to maybe contribute something of value that might make your time at home a little bit more pleasurable. So I decided that I would go ahead and start reading The Golden Telescope, a few chapters at a time, and see if that might help entertain you a little bit during your time at home. Also, if you are interested and you would like to read along with me, I'll leave the link to the book, which is available on Amazon, down below. And that way you can go and either download the ebook, or you can do like I'm doing and read from the actual book. This is my author copy, so it's got this little stripe across it that you won't get on your copy, but this is the book. And I can't even tell you how cool it is to have a physical book to put my hands on. Look how cute that is. My designer did such a great job of adding nice little details, and even the binding, even the spine is really nice. So anyway, this is the book, and it's book 1 in my series called Jack and the Magic Hat Maker, and book 1 is called The Golden Telescope. And so without further ado, this first installment will be, I think, we'll see how far I get, but I'm planning to read the prologue through chapter 5. And then there are 37 chapters plus a prologue and an epilogue. So if I read a few chapters every week, then this might keep you occupied or have something to look forward to every week to listen to, or read the next few chapters. I know that some people, I privately read chapters to some close friends and family members, and they enjoy listening rather than taking the time to read it themselves. So, and this is totally just raw and edited, and excuse the glare on my glasses, but I need them to read. So, without further ado, I'll get started. Prologue. Portland, Oregon, 9 years ago. The butler materialized into the nursery on a hot and muggy summer night. Standing invisible and undetected in the far corner of the room, he discovered 3 young children, sleeping soundly, each one in their own little bed. He had to complete this mission with speed and stealth. None of the home's 5 inhabitants could know of his presence. He reached across his chest and into his jacket, retrieving a manila packet, from which he withdrew a small pair of black-handled barber's shears and 3 white envelopes. Each had a name on the front, written in his master's elegant script: Ethan, Jack, and Sadie. A soft breeze made the wispy curtains at the window billow gently as he tiptoed to the bed closest to him. Bending over the toddler, he gingerly snipped one single, sandy-colored lock from her cherubic head and placed it into the envelope marked Sadie. Lifting the parcel to his lips, he involuntarily winced at the mildly offensive taste of peppermint-flavored glue, before sealing it closed and returning it to his pocket. He walked carefully past the foot of Sadie's bed and onto the second one. This first boy was sprawled out across his mattress, covers thrown aside, half of them lying in a pile on the floor. He wore pale blue pajamas with bright red cars and yellow numbers printed all over them. Stepping cautiously over the blanket, the man moved to the head of the bed and was just leaning in, scissors in hand, when the child began to stir. The butler jumped back, losing his balance on the discarded sheets, nearly knocking the lamp from the bedside table as his arms helicoptered to right himself. He watched with bated breath as Jack rolled over, fitfully clutching after the fluffy white teddy bear sitting next to his head. With a carefully drawn-out sigh, the man waited a moment until the boy had settled before approaching once again. Bending cautiously over the lad, he delicately clipped a fringe of chocolate brown hair from the nape of Jack's neck, placing it into its envelope, then sealed it closed and added it to his pocket alongside Sadie's. He then made his way to the last, slightly larger bed, located directly beneath the open window. The boy, lying there, was the oldest of the 3 children. The burglar found him face down with his arms wrapped tightly around his pillow. The pitch-black curls on top of his head were loose and abundant, but cropped short around his ears. The man held his breath as he reached out and anxiously grasped a stray section, deftly cutting it from the boy's head. Returning to an upright position, he exhaled a silent sigh of relief, then moved stealthily to the other side of the room, before placing the last lock of hair into the final envelope marked Ethan. Tucking the packet neatly inside his suit coat, he looked around one last time, a smile curving his lips as he reached up, located the small button situated under the brim of his hat, and firmly pressed it. Instantly, the man vanished from the room. Chapter 1. Jack. Portland, Oregon, present day. Jack sat up, gasping for air, and turned on the nightlight located on the small cardboard box next to his bed. Scrambling for his inhaler, he shoved it into his mouth and depressed the nozzle, inhaling long and deep. He breathed in a sufficient dose of the medicine, and it had the desired effect. Exhaling a bone-weary sigh of relief, he put it back in its place and reached for the water bottle sitting next to him. The memory was fuzzy, like looking at a photo through grease-smudged reading glasses. There was something there, just beyond his grasp, that he couldn't quite bring into focus. Faces he strained to remember. They came to him most often in his dreams, a presence and a warmth that would wash over and fill him with a sense of comfort and belonging unfamiliar to him. In his waking life, fleeting images of love and laughter, of family. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, they were gone. These memories didn't happen every night. They were sporadic, and he wasn't quite sure what triggered them. But sometimes, like this night, he'd awaken with a jolt, hyperventilating, heart pounding, his dark hair soaked with perspiration, and bedclothes clinging to every inch of his scrawny preteen body. It could take several minutes just to get his breathing back under control. And more recently, a new sensation had amplified the experience. His hands tingled. No, burned. Intensely. Not in the same way your arm might feel if you'd been resting your head on it for too long. No, this was different. Normally, the feeling would fade as he came to a fully awakened state, and he'd almost forget about it as the day wore on, until the experience repeated itself. But he knew, without a doubt, that whatever prompted these episodes most assuredly must also be the source of his chronic asthma attacks. It had been 9 years since his parents died, and he knew that no matter how much time passed, he would never get over the loss. Reaching again to his makeshift bedside table, he lifted his smartphone and the screen burst to life, revealing the time. Only 3:10 a.m. With a groan, Jack flopped back down on his pancake of a pillow. It was too early to wake up. But after tonight's dream, there was no way he was getting back to sleep. Grabbing the phone, he threw back the dingy white sheet and thin plaid blanket covering his bed, then swung his feet out and onto the cold concrete floor. Unlocking his phone, He tapped the icon for the calculator displayed prominently on the home screen and began working out a particularly difficult formula he'd been thinking about. A loud bling startled Jack out of his mathematical delirium. He rubbed his eyes and frowned at the message preview that dropped down at the top of the screen. Bart. What in the world is Bart doing up at? He shifted his gaze to look at the time in the upper right corner of the phone. 6:30 a.m. His eyes flew open wide in surprise, but he recovered quickly. Truth be told, it never failed to amaze him how quickly time passed when he was working through math problems. Rubbing his eyes and shoving his fingers through his bangs to get them out of the way, he began reading the text. Meet me at Pop's a few minutes before school. There's something I want to show you. What's so exciting that we have to meet before school? Jack replied, then watched for Bart's response, which came almost immediately. Just trust me, you're going to want to see this. Jack sighed. He knew Aunt Lizzie wouldn't approve of him taking a detour before school, but what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Old Town Chinatown, Northwest 2nd and Davis, the robo-woman's monotonous voice announced over the intercom. Jack stuffed his phone into the side pocket of his thigh-length navy pea coat, grabbed his backpack, and stood up, gripping tightly to the handrail as the Max car slowed with a screech and a jerk to a stop. When the doors slid open, he dashed out of the train, sprinted to the corner, looked both ways, and ran across the street. He could already see his friend, a block further down the road, waving enthusiastically in his direction. A little taller and about 20 pounds heavy and about 20 pounds chunkier than Jack, Bart was, he thought to himself, a bit of a dork. But that was one of the things he liked best about him. Standing there, shifting back and forth from one foot to the other, Bart was dressed in typical Portlander gear. Red Converse tennis shoes, white cotton ankle socks, crunchy-looking khaki cargo shorts that came down to his calves, and a striped t-shirt. And of course, he also wore a forest green ball cap with a bright yellow O, pegging him as a Ducks fan. Shaggy bits of sandy-colored hair had escaped from under the hat, almost completely covering his eyes. As Jack came closer, he could see two thin white cords dangling from Bart's ears and disappearing into his right front pants pocket. "Hey, what took you so long?" Bart shouted as he moved to meet him at the corner. "I've been here for 10 minutes already." He motioned for Jack to follow and turned. "There was some holdup at the square," Jack said, readjusting the strap of his backpack slung over his left shoulder as they walked. "It probably would have been faster if I'd just gotten off the train and headed over on foot. Speaking of feet," he bent over to retie a lace that had come loose on his two-tone leather wingtips, then stood back up before continuing. "But I'm here now. What's so exciting that we have to meet before school?" Bart was already standing in front of the familiar destination. Flanagan's Hobby Shop was owned by his dad, Bill Flanagan, and it was their favorite hangout. Jack spent most days after class with his best friend, helping in the family store. In exchange, Pop paid them a small weekly allowance for their assistance. This was a good deal for Bill, since the boys spent most of that money buying some cool new items that they wanted from the store. Grabbing hold of the key on the ring at the end of the purple plastic spiral band he always wore around his wrist, Bart inserted it into the lock on the old sage green and glass door and opened. "Just you wait, Jack. This is going to blow your mind," Bart said, as he walked in and flipped the light switch on the wall just inside. Flooding the long, narrow space, The light revealed floor-to-ceiling shelves lining the walls on either side of the shop, each one filled to overflowing with fanciful-looking merchandise of all shapes and sizes. Art kits, race car, hot rod, and airplane models to assemble, tiny square glass bottles of brightly colored paints in every shade of the rainbow, glues and tools and books and wooden boxes filled with X-Acto knives. Jack loved being here. This special little shop made him feel he had been transported to another place in time, a place that stimulated his imagination, and the cares of the world withered away, leaving him only with dreams of possibility. Bart confidently made his way to the back of the store, where a thick burgundy drape hung from the top of the doorframe down to the floor. Jack glanced at the "Employees Only" sign posted on the wall before following him through and into a part of the shop very few people were permitted to see. The room stretched back with workbenches and shelves crammed to the gills with all kinds of supplies lining both walls. They passed a dark, open staircase leading down to Jack didn't really know where, before Bart came to a stop in front of an old mahogany door. He turned to look at Jack with a twinkle in his eye. "Pop keeps his office locked, but he told me it's okay if I take you in to show you this thing he discovered last night." Spinning back around, Bart inserted the same key into the lock and turned the knob. There were no windows in this part of the building, so it was pitch black inside, the only illumination coming from the outer office. Jack squinted toward the far side of the room, where Bart fumbled for the switch on a green glass and brass lamp, sitting on top of an old roll-top desk. Turning it on, he motioned for Jack to join him. "Close the door behind you, just in case," he said, and Jack complied before continuing to stand beside his friend. "Dude, what's all the mystery about?" Jack asked. "You make it seem like your dad has some kind of national treasure hidden back here or something." He laughed nervously. "Well, that's not such a stretch," Bart said, lifting the lid on the wooden desk to reveal the inner surface, drawers, and cubbyholes filled to bursting with papers, pens, receipts, and... Jack's eyes were immediately drawn to the singular most interesting item of all. There, sitting in plain view, was a shiny golden telescope. Jack could see that there were lots of unusual symbols engraved all over the exterior of it, and wondered what, if anything, they meant. Picking the treasure up carefully and holding it nimbly in both hands, Bart turned to face Jack. "My dad thinks this," he started a little too dramatically for Jack's taste, "might have belonged to Joseph Bunko Kelly." Bart widened his eyes for emphasis, but Jack only stared back at him with a blank, inquisitive look on his face. He waited for Bart to go on, but their stare-off continued. Finally, Jack asked, "And who is that, precisely?" Bart's jaw dropped. "What? You've never heard of the Kidnapping King of Portland? Are you serious?" he said, setting the glass back down on the desk. "You know this shop sits on top of the old Shanghai tunnels, right?" He didn't wait for Jack to respond before hurrying on. "Well, Bunko Kelly is only the most famous kidnapper of them all. He supposedly smuggled over 2,000 men out of this place. His guys drugged unsuspecting sailors, then hustled them out through the secret underground passageways and onto ships waiting in the harbor. Crazy, huh?" he finished, and turned to once again pick up the telescope. Looking at Jack, he held it out in his direction. "You want to check it out?" "Wow," Jack said, reaching out to take hold of it. "Your dad really thinks this thing might be his?" The moment his fingers grasped the telescope, a burning sensation shot like a lightning bolt up his arm, filling his head with a blaze of light that electrified his brain, blinding him to the world around him. Suddenly, in his mind's eye, he was looking out across a massive expanse of midnight blue water, salt air filling his nostrils, his feet steady but unfamiliar, as the slippery surface on which he stood rocked violently back and forth with the movement of waves. Looking down to his hands, he could see the telescope grasped in both of them. But to his surprise, those weren't his hands he was gazing at. They were much larger than his own, and older, with hair on the knuckles, and a gold ring with a big black stone displayed prominently on the ring finger of the right hand. Jack dropped the telescope at once and immediately found himself back in Bill's office, sprawled on the floor, looking up at Bart, who was frantically shaking his right arm. "Jack! Jack! What the hell?" Intermission. Chapter 2. Edward. Dublin, Ireland, 8 years ago. MacPayden Manor sat at the end of a long, winding driveway on the top of a rocky hill overlooking the Irish Sea. It was more than a house, much more. Built of dark gray bumpy stone, there were 15 bedrooms and almost as many bathrooms in the place. It was large and imposing, but to those that resided in it, it possessed a rustic warmth uncommon for mansions of its size. Having lived there more than half his 54 years, Arthur, the butler, certainly thought so. Entering the library, he found his dear old friend and master, Sir Edward, seated in a large brocade wing-back chair facing the roaring fire, his slippered feet stretched out in front of him to absorb the warmth. "Sir Edward," Arthur said, "I thought you might like a brandy to chase away the chill before you retire for the evening." He carried a decanter of honey-colored liquid with him on a silver platter. A single snifter sat next to it at the ready. He sat the tray down on the round walnut table next to the chair. Gazing up at him over wire-rimmed reading glasses, Sir Edward glanced over to the tray, the flickering light of the fire glowing across his penetrating hazel eyes. "Why, yes, Artie, that would be lovely," he responded in a weary old voice. That Master MacPayden was in his golden years was self-evident. His full head of hair, which was once raven black, was now heavily streaked with gray, and there was a deep sense of sadness in his overall demeanor, indication of a past filled with immense pain and loss. And yet, his chiseled jaw, prominent nose, and the way he squared his shoulders still offered a glimpse of the powerful man he had once been. The deep, resonant tone of the doorbell announced an unexpected evening visitor. The two gentlemen shared a curious glance before the butler, carrying out his duty, made his way from the library to the imposing mahogany and iron front entrance. Two silhouettes stood beyond the dappled glass, and as Arthur pulled the door open, his surprise was obvious, not only in his expression, but the constricted "Oh!" that erupted from his tight-lipped smile. Inez and Clara MacPayden had aged considerably in the 16 years since he last saw their faces, but there was no mistaking the stark, if intimidating, beauty of the pair. "Arthur!" the girls chimed, in a sing-song sort of way that said they were less than genuinely happy to see him. "It's been too long," Inez said, shifting uncomfortably under the butler's scrutinizing gaze. Arthur did not move, nor invite them inside, and so the two sisters pushed past him into the main foyer, barely a glance in his direction. "Where is he?" Clara asked, glancing to the left, toward the library. Is he in there? Inez headed in that direction. Arthur followed, keeping up a brisk yet silent step to fall ahead of them. Sir Edward is not expecting you, he said. I will announce you. And he attempted to sidestep them, blocking their path. Nonsense, Inez proclaimed. He will be thrilled to see us. The two sisters strode confidently past him and on into the room. Daddy! They shrieked in discordant, high-pitched voices. Sir Edward looked up and his eyebrows raised, though he did not move further. Girls, he said, slowly putting his brandy down. He studied them closely and allowed a moment for their presence to register before cautiously standing to greet them. This is a surprise. His words were measured with skepticism. Edward took a few steps in their direction, then stopped in front of his daughters, expectant. Inez had been 24 and Clara only 19 years of age when they stormed out in an angry rage 16 long years ago, vowing never to return. The two women standing before Sir Edward now were once the same little girls he had raised and loved, but much older to be sure. And time hadn't been particularly kind to them either. There was a hardness in their faces that one from their past wouldn't recognize, and an energy about them that bred unease. Their presence at the manor was unexpected and suspicious to Sir Edward, and yet the possibility of making amends with his remaining children outshone those thoughts, as it would any grieving father. He opened his arms wide in a gesture of embrace. Welcome home, he said, and they eagerly lunged forward, wrapping their arms around him, patting him gingerly on the back, and giggling a bit too much before stepping away. Arthur remained by the door, observing the encounter, when Edward caught his eye. I tried to announce them, sir, he flatly stated, clearly unimpressed with the saccharine sweet display of affection. But they insisted. It's fine, Arthur. Please bring us some refreshments, Edward said, and relaxing a bit, he motioned for the women to join him before the fireplace. Sit with me. We have so much catching up to do, he said, settling back into his chair. I want to hear all about what you've been up to. Well, speaking of that, Daddy dear, Inez took the lead. Clara and I have been talking about how unreasonable we've been all these years, refusing to talk to you. And we just feel so bad about blaming you and abandoning you the way we did. Clara nodded her head enthusiastically. That's right, Daddy. We feel just awful, she said, sticking out her bottom lip. And we have come here today to ask your forgiveness and to beg you to take us back into the family again. Inez appeared repentant, her eyes tearing up just a little. We really should have come last year, after hearing about what happened to Ross. We know you must have been devastated. Inez looked at her sister. We certainly were, Clara finished, and they both bowed their heads. After what happened to Ross? Edward asked, leaning forward now, curious. How do you know about that? Ross had been out of the country and out of touch for years. Oh, Daddy, he was our little brother, Inez said. Long ago, we hired a private investigator because we wanted to reconnect with him, try to rebuild our relationship. Just because we were mad at you wasn't any reason for us to lose touch with our baby brother. But he was a smart kid and did a really good job of covering his tracks, as I'm sure you know, Clara interjected. So it took a very long time before we were able to find him. Years, in fact. Inez made it clear that she concurred. And it's so tragic that we were finally able to locate him just weeks before the accident. The old man remained silent for a moment, his gaze slipping toward the mantel over the fireplace, where a photograph stood in a golden frame that glinted in the firelight. A young boy, his son, his only son. Sir Edward pulled a white cotton kerchief from his left breast pocket and blotted the corners of both eyes before returning his gaze to his daughters. "Our family has suffered far too much tragedy over the years, girls," he started. "First, the loss of your sweet mother, which caused so much pain and division between us. And then Ross's death." Edward removed his glasses to wipe away the tears that gathered beneath them. "I'm grateful, though," he continued, "that at least his death has finally prompted you to come here today, so that we are able to make amends and move forward together." He finished as Arthur re-entered the room carrying a pitcher of iced tea and a silver tray filled with a variety of meats, cheeses, and crackers. Setting it down on the coffee table before them, he looked inquisitively at Edward, then to the two women, and back again. "Sir, will you be needing anything else?" he asked. "Thank you. No, Artie. We are doing fine. More than fine, actually," Edward said, adding, "The girls and I have so much to talk about. You may leave us for the evening." Inez jumped in, smiling brightly. "Oh, yes, we can see ourselves out when we're ready to go, Arthur. No need to worry about us." "Don't be ridiculous, Inez," Edward interjected. "The two of you will spend the night here. It's already so late in the day, and I won't hear of you staying elsewhere." Then, turning again to Arthur, he added, "Please see to it that rooms are prepared for my daughters before you retire." "Certainly, sir," Arthur replied, though his apprehensiveness did not go unnoticed by the two sisters, who challenged him with their returning stares. "If you'll be needing nothing else." Once more Arthur's eyes flicked over the two women before he turned to leave the library. Looking back at his daughters, Edward continued. "Now, where were we?" he asked, a small smile crossing his lips. "Oh, Daddy," Clara began, "we were just getting ready to say, well, Inez and I have been thinking that with Ross gone and all, maybe you'd like to involve us in the family business, if you get my meaning." She was shifting nervously in her seat, looking back and forth from her father to Inez and back again. "Yes, Daddy. Clara and I have gotten over our feelings of anger and resentment where your abilities are concerned, and would like nothing more than to have you teach us. Help us develop our powers so that we can assist you. Maybe together we have a better chance of finding Mama," she concluded, anxiously anticipating her father's response. "Well, now, girls, it means so much to me that you have had a change of heart. It really does." He looked at each of them with sincerity as he spoke, wanting to make sure he didn't offend or injure their fragile new relationship in any way. "But you know that my particular gift is handed down to one recipient in the bloodline, and in this case, that person was Ross. So it would be impossible for either of you to continue my work." Observing the clear disappointment on their faces, he quickly added, But I can assist you in other ways to develop your own gifts. I'd be very pleased to do that." And he watched uneasily to see how they would respond. "But Daddy," Inez began, "we want to learn how to make the hats." Inez's change in tone didn't go unnoticed by Edward. Her insistence and desperation leaked into her words. Looking at Clara with a different, more focused expression on her face, she urged her sister to persuade him further. "Daddy, is there no way to get around that little rule?" Clara pleaded, taking a more gentle approach than her sister. "It would mean so much to us if you could figure out a way." She stood and began pacing next to her chair. Inez started tapping her fingernails on the glass she held in her hands. The tink, 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 filling the awkward silence as Sir Edward watched each of his daughters in turn. These changes in behavior did not escape his observation, and he adjusted his position in his seat, sitting up a little taller. No, ladies, I cannot get around that little rule, as you say. I have no control over the forces that dictate what powers and abilities are bestowed upon which individuals. The tapping stopped as Inez clasped her glass tightly in her hand, threatening to crush the fragile crystal. You didn't come here to make amends today, did you, girls? Edward asked. What is it you truly want from me? Fine then, Father. If you insist on being difficult, have it your way. Inez spoke quietly, each word dripping like battery acid from her carnelian-colored lips. I knew you would refuse us access anyhow. You have always made it abundantly clear who your favorite child was. She looked to her sister, then motioned toward the foyer. Clara walked to the large double doors at the entrance of the library, and after closing them, twisted the lock. You might as well know the truth of the matter. Inez paused, and her eyes searched the walls of books as if drawing her words from them. It was no accident that killed your son and his wife, she said, and a cold, calculated expression spread across her ashen face, blue-green veins now visible through the crepe-thin skin at her temples. We arranged the whole thing. A silence quieter than death filled the room. Even the fireplace seemed void of warmth as Inez's icy, aqua-blue eyes met those of her father. You? Sir Edward spoke slowly, as if struggling to wrap his mind around the wicked words of his daughter. But soon, as his eyes held her unflinching gaze, his mouth dropped open, and his gentle face paled. Lifting his head and turning his attention to Clara, he searched her face for some indication that her sister was only attempting to manipulate him further. But rather than relief, he found only a hint of malicious glee in her expression. And we have the children, Inez continued. It was barely audible, but the impact of her words was visible in the older man's countenance, and she beamed, knowing she had struck a near-lethal blow. Seizing upon this moment of weakness, she thrust her long, thin fingers into the jet-black hair on top of her head and withdrew a small dagger. She crossed the dimly lit room in 3 quick strides and placed the sharp steel tip of it just beneath his chin. Sir Edward remained immovable, as though he had become numb to her actions, paralyzed by her words. A single tear escaped from the inner corner of his right eye, tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek. This is your fault, she hissed. If you hadn't been so damned self-absorbed and consumed with saving the world. She pushed the knife slightly into his fragile skin until one fat drop of dark red blood oozed out and dripped down the blade. We would still have our mother. Clara shrieked. No, Inez, stop. You go too far. We never agreed to kill him. She dashed to where Inez stood and grabbed her sister by the shoulders. Then, taking a deep breath, she continued in a more measured and controlled voice. Calm yourself, sister. We need him if we're to have a rat's chance in hell of getting her back. He is the only one with the knowledge. Reluctantly, Inez withdrew the dagger from her father's chin. She stared at it for a long moment, then wiped the blood away with her left index finger, inserting it into her mouth, and sucked the drop away. Your blood runs through our veins too, old man. You would do well to remember that, she said. Then, lifting both her arms to her hair, she deftly twisted it into a knot and returned the dagger to its hiding place. Turning her back on her father, she moved to join her sister. Your days are numbered, Sir Edward. It's only a matter of time before you are gone and no longer have any power over us. The quiet whisper of Sir Edward's voice was barely audible as they reached the library doors. What of the children? Oh, we have plans for them, Clara stated matter-of-factly. The sisters looked at one another and disappeared around the corner. And I think that's it for tonight. I've been reading for 40 minutes, and as you can tell, my tongue's getting tangled up. So I will hold off on reading the next chapters until the next time. So I hope you've enjoyed my reading of The Golden Telescope, Book 1 in my series, Jack and the Magic Hatmaker. If you like the story, feel free to go and click on the link below for an ebook download or to order the paperback, and you can read along with me as I read the future chapters. So again, if you like this content, if you like this video and would like to hear more, be sure to subscribe to my channel and also ring that little bell so that you know when I upload new content, because I don't upload content that often, but I will be reading more chapters in the days and weeks ahead. So I hope that you enjoyed that. And if you did, please leave your comments down below and let me know what you think, if you have any questions about the story. And I would love to read those and respond to you. So until next time, let's see, it is Thursday evening. Maybe I'll just try to read and upload on Thursday evenings until I finish reading the book. And by the way, I am about a third of the way into writing book 2, The Kidnapping King. And this is going to be a series of 9 books, which I've already got all slotted out and planned and on track for publication. So I was intending to release 3 books this year, but given the current state of affairs, I haven't been writing as much as I would like to have been. And so I'm still shooting for 1 book by the end of this year before the holidays. So anyway, I will have more to read to you after book 1. So hopefully you like this and you'll want to keep hearing more. Until next time, this is Tracy Partridge-Johnson signing off. Take good care.